The room at Rochester was cold, and the man who walked into it was wearing a hood. Anne of Cleves did not know his face. She had crossed the sea to marry a king she had never met, and now, on New Year's Day, a stranger in a marbled cloak crossed the floor toward her and put his arms around her before she could speak. He expected her to know him instantly, to feel it, the way a story would tell it, a destined recognition, a courtly game she had never been taught to play. She pulled back. She did not know this man was Henry VIII, King of England, and she treated him the way any woman would treat an unfamiliar stranger who had grabbed her in a strange country. Henry removed the hood. He expected delight. He got confusion. He left the room within minutes. By the time he reached his own chamber, he had already told the men around him that she was not what he had been promised. 6 days later, he married her anyway. 6 months after that, churchmen, physicians, and courtiers would sit in a formal assembly and decide, on the king's word, that the marriage had never legally happened at all, while the woman it concerned was not in the room. This is the story of how one failed disguise became the excuse for erasing a queen, and of whether Anne of Cleves survived what came next through brilliant calculation, frightened obedience, or something in between that history has never quite been able to prove. If you're drawn to the darker corners of history, subscribe to Grimmer History. We're on our way to 45,000 subscribers. Anne grew up in Düsseldorf, in the household of the Duke of Cleves, trained the way a German noblewoman of her rank was trained, to run a household, to sew, to read and write in her own language. She was not taught French. She was not taught to dance the way the English court danced, or to make the kind of witty conversation that impressed ambassadors. Nobody in Cleves thought she would need it. She was raised to be useful to a marriage, not to charm a foreign court. Across the sea, Henry VIII had a problem that no amount of charm could solve. His son Edward had been born, but a single male heir was not security. It was a single point of failure. His third wife, Jane Seymour, had died shortly after giving him that son, which meant the king, who had already broken with the Roman Church, executed a queen, and set aside another, now needed a new marriage that could produce more heirs and repair his position abroad. That position was worse than it looked from a throne room. England's split from Rome had left Henry politically isolated. France and the Holy Roman Empire, usually rivals, had briefly cooled their hostility toward each other, which meant they had room to turn their attention toward England instead. The Pope had renewed pressure against Henry. His chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, the architect of England's break with Rome and the man now searching for a way out of the king's isolation, needed an ally who did not answer to the Pope or the Emperor. Cleves fit. Anne's brother William, Duke of Cleves, was in his own standoff with the Emperor over disputed territory, which meant he needed English support just as much as Cromwell needed a German alliance. Anne was not a participant in these negotiations. She was the proof of them, a woman whose marriage would function as a signed treaty with a pulse. Neither Henry nor Anne had ever seen each other's face. Descriptions from ambassadors were not considered reliable enough. So Henry did what any careful buyer would do. He sent for a portrait. The artist he chose was the most dangerous kind of witness, one whose work could not later be dismissed as gossip. That decision would define how the entire story of Anne of Cleves got told for the next 500 years. Notice what is already missing from this arrangement. Nobody asked Anne what she wanted. Nobody asked whether she found the idea of marrying a much older foreign king, sight unseen, on the other side of the sea from everyone she had ever known, appealing or frightening. Her personal feelings about the marriage were never recorded, because nobody at the negotiating table considered them relevant to record. She was the outcome of a negotiation between men who needed her to exist as a wife, far more than they needed to know her as a person. Hans Holbein the Younger, Henry's court painter, already famous for his exacting, unflattering honesty, was sent to Cleves in the summer of 1539 to paint Anne and her sister. The English envoy present, Nicholas Wotton, reported back that the likenesses were lively, meaning convincing, meaning recognizable. Nobody who saw the painting at the time accused Holbein of flattery. Henry approved the match based on that portrait. This detail matters because within a year, an entire legend would grow up blaming the painter for what happened next. For now, the portrait did its job. The marriage agreement was signed. Anne began the journey toward a country whose language she barely spoke, to marry a man she had only seen on canvas. She reached Calais in December, delayed by weather. She reached Dover 4 days after Christmas. She had traveled further from home than most women of her class ever would, into a country that judged foreign brides on sight, and she arrived exhausted, in winter, with an interpreter and a small household of German attendants who understood English customs no better than she did. Then came Rochester. Chroniclers disagree about exactly how Anne reacted in that first moment. Later, more colorful retellings would claim she shoved the king away, or insulted him outright. What can actually be shown is simpler and, in its way, worse. She did not recognize a stranger as her intended husband, because nobody had warned her that a hooded man bursting into her rooms might be the king performing a piece of courtly theater. She failed a test she was never told she was taking. Henry left angry. He told his courtiers, almost immediately, that she was not what he had been promised. Officials scrambled to find a legal way out of the marriage before it happened. Some diplomatic flaw, some contract loophole. They found none that could be used without insulting Cleves and collapsing the very alliance Cromwell had built England's safety on. So on the 6th of January, at Greenwich Palace, Henry VIII married Anne of Cleves anyway, in front of the court, in a wedding he had already privately declared a disappointment before it began. This is the part of the story most retellings skip past to get to the divorce. But it is the hinge the entire horror turns on. Henry married a woman he had decided, days earlier, that he did not want, because the state needed the marriage more than the king wanted the wife. Anne walked into that marriage without knowing any of it. She believed she was becoming queen. She had already, without being told, become a political liability her husband was looking for an exit from. The wedding was not the danger. The danger was that everyone in the room, except Anne, already knew it was temporary. For a few months, nothing appeared to happen. Anne settled into English customs. She later told the Countess of Rutland, one of her ladies, about affectionate but limited contact with Henry at night, a description that suggests she genuinely did not understand what the court expected to have occurred in that bed. Nobody had explained the stakes to her. Nobody had explained that her marriage's legal survival might one day depend on exactly what had or had not happened between those sheets. Then the diplomatic weather changed. Henry's attention moved to a young woman in Anne's own household, Catherine Howard, a gentlewoman connected to one of the most ambitious families at court. And Cromwell, the minister who had built the entire Cleves alliance, was arrested in June. The man who might have protected the marriage was suddenly fighting for his own life. In the same week, Anne was sent away from court to Richmond Palace. The official reason given was the risk of disease. The real reason unfolded over the following days. Royal officials began collecting statements, from courtiers, from physicians, from the women who had attended Anne, about the state of her marriage. Cromwell, arrested and facing execution, was questioned about it too, from his prison cell, supplying testimony about a marriage he had once championed. Slow down here, because this is the part that should feel wrong. A king who wanted out of a marriage did not need to prove Anne had done anything. He needed the machinery of his own church, the one he had personally built out of the ruins of Rome, to declare, retroactively, that the marriage had never legally existed. The case against the marriage rested on 3 arguments. First, an old, supposedly abandoned, childhood betrothal of Anne's to a French nobleman, revived now as though it had never been settled. Second, Henry's own claim that he had never truly consented, a king declaring, after the fact, that his own public wedding vows had not reflected his free will. Third, and most damaging to Anne personally, the official claim that the marriage had never been consummated, built out of the king's private testimony about his own reactions to her. Anne was not present for any of this. She was not invited to argue her own case before the churchmen who examined it. The record, assembled by men answering to the king who wanted the outcome, concluded exactly what Henry needed it to conclude. When German diplomats reported her reaction to the news, they described a woman who appeared outwardly composed, but who, underneath, feared for her own safety. She had watched this king discard one wife and execute another. She had no reason to assume good treatment was guaranteed. Advisors around her offered reassurance that Henry did not intend her harm. Nobody could have promised that with certainty, and Anne had no real way to test it except by finding out. She agreed. She wrote letters accepting the annulment, confirming, in her own hand, that she had never truly been Henry's wife. What that agreement cost her, and whether it was courage or survival instinct or simple terror, is something no surviving document can answer for certain. What can be shown is what it bought her. Henry gave Anne a new title, the King's Sister, with a formal place at court, second only to the Queen and the King's own daughters. He gave her an income of £500 a year, estates, and the very palace she had been exiled to during the investigation, Richmond. Later, she gained access to more properties still, including Hever Castle, once the Boleyn family home. She kept her jewelry, her plate, her clothing. She agreed, in exchange, to remain in England. She returned her wedding ring and asked that it be broken, because the marriage that gave it meaning had officially never existed. It is one of the few gestures in this entire story that can be read, without much dispute, as Anne asserting some control over her own ending. The men connected to her fall did not do as well. Thomas Cromwell, the minister who built the Cleves alliance and then supplied testimony against the marriage from his own prison cell, was executed on the 28th of July, 1540. On that same day, Henry married Catherine Howard, the young woman from Anne's household who had drawn his attention months earlier. Two fates settled in a single afternoon: one man's death, one woman's coronation as queen, and the former queen who made both possible was neither invited to celebrate nor forced to mourn. She simply continued. Catherine Howard's reign did not last. Within 2 years, she was executed on charges related to her conduct before and during the marriage. Henry died in 1547, having married twice more after Catherine. Of all the women who passed through his 6 marriages, Anne of Cleves, the one he had rejected within days of meeting her, was the one who outlived every single one of them, including the king himself. She never remarried. She lived out her years on her English estates, attended court events on occasion, and built a workable, sometimes genuinely warm relationship with Henry's daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, the 2 women in England who understood better than anyone what it meant to have your legitimacy decided by other people's politics. When Mary was crowned queen in 1553, Anne rode in the procession. She died in July of 1557. Sources differ by a day on the exact date. Mary ordered her a Catholic funeral at Westminster Abbey, where she was buried near the high altar, an honor most of Henry's other wives never received. Consider what that burial actually represents. A woman brought to England as a diplomatic instrument, publicly declared unwanted by her own husband within days of meeting her, legally stripped of the title of queen within a year of gaining it, given, at the end, a resting place inside the most important church in the kingdom, closer to its center than the wife Henry had once been so desperate to marry that he broke with Rome to get her. The system that erased Anne's marriage never fully erased Anne. The woman who failed a courtly disguise test on her first night in England ended up the longest surviving queen of the 6. The version of this story that survived for centuries was not the one you just heard. It was simpler, crueler, and far more convenient for everyone except Anne. The most famous detail people repeat about Anne of Cleves, that Henry called her a Flanders mare, does not appear in any document from her lifetime. It surfaces more than a century later in a history written by Gilbert Burnet in 1679, and from there it spread until it became, for most people, the entire story. An ugly foreign bride, a disgusted king, could not bring himself to touch. It is a rumor with a traceable origin, and it survived because it was simpler than the truth. A truth that involved isolated diplomacy, a failed piece of courtly theater, and a legal system built to serve one man's convenience. A companion legend blames Hans Holbein, accusing him of painting Anne more beautiful than she really was, deceiving Henry into a marriage he never wanted. The contemporary record does not support it. Wotton's own report called the portrait lifelike, and no one at the time accused the painter of dishonesty. The deception story is useful because it hands the blame to a foreign woman, an ambitious minister, and a supposedly dishonest artist, anyone except the king who married her, then decided 6 months later that he hadn't. More recently, some retellings have swung the other way entirely, casting Anne as the clever winner of the whole arrangement, a woman who cheerfully engineered her own wealthy retirement. There is truth buried in that version too. Her settlement was real, and her survival was genuinely impressive. But turning her into a smiling strategist erases the part where German diplomats described a woman frightened for her safety, agreeing to a legal fiction about her own marriage, because the alternative was unknowable, and the man deciding her fate had already executed one queen. The most honest version sits between the myths. Anne of Cleves was not simply ugly, not simply foolish, not simply lucky, and not simply clever. She was a foreign noblewoman, handed into a political marriage with no real power in it, publicly humiliated by a king's own testimony, and she adapted, with real skill, to the extremely narrow set of choices that were left to her once the outcome had already been decided by someone else. So, brilliant strategy, frightened compliance, or both? That was the question this video opened on. The honest answer is that Anne of Cleves never had the power to choose the crisis. She only had the power to choose how she survived it, and she made every choice available to her count. She agreed to a lie about her own marriage because the men who controlled the process had already decided the outcome, and refusing would not have protected her. It would only have removed her ability to negotiate the terms of her own erasure. That is not the same as consent. It is closer to the only form of leverage a powerless person can still exercise, choosing how you lose, when you cannot choose whether you lose. Henry's court remembered the wedding, the alliance, the treaty it was meant to secure. The official record remembered a marriage that, on paper, never happened at all. But somewhere underneath both of those versions was a woman who understood, faster than almost anyone else at that court, that in Henry VIII's England, the truth mattered far less than what could be written down and signed.